The mirror that never sleeps. My mirror never sleeps. I found it at the end of a rain-slick Saturday, half hidden against the alley wall between a closed antique shop and a bakery that smelled of yeast and burnt sugar. It had a carved frame like ribs, heavy with a patina that caught the light in greenish hints. I am a restorer by trade, things with histories call to me, and I thought naively that fixing the glass would smooth whatever complaint it carried. I carried it upstairs, humming, unaware of how quickly evenings could bend. At home, the mirror filled the narrow hallway like an answer to a question I hadn't asked. I placed it on a tempered stand above a thin console table and propped a faded photograph and a small brass key beneath its edge, the sort of objects one keeps under glass for luck or courage. Each night, I would pass it, coat scrunched, keys in hand, and for a week, nothing was wrong. Its reflection matched the hallway's familiar geometry. It reflected me. It reflected light. I began to think perhaps I had imagined the stories waiting inside. The first small irregularity arrived in the deep hours when sleep loosened certainties. I woke to find the bulb in the hall still, although I'd remembered switching it off. The mirror held light like a minor crime. The reflection of the hallway was a half-second behind, as if it watched my apartment with the lag of someone paging through memories. I stood and stared. My reflection blinked a breath after I had. The delay was impossible and ordinary all at once, like a seam showing through wallpaper. I wrote it down in the leather notebook, dated with trembling neatness. Sleep frayed after that. The mirror's discrepancies multiplied in patient increments. A picture frame hung a hairline lower in the glass than on the wall, a shadow that began and ended where no object cast it, a smell of old cedar that leaked from the frame when the window was closed. I tested things: the clock, the lamp, the angle of the glass. The mirror kept a contrary order, never chaotic, never cruel, only meticulous. The more I catalogued, the more the margins of my life looked like notes the glass had made without asking permission. Mrs. Albright knocked 3 nights later, voice like paper rubbing paper. She had been the building's quiet constable for as long as anyone remembered, a woman with pockets full of foreign coins and little folded maps of people's habits. She didn't come with gossip that night. She came with a word. "Watch it," she said, and left the rest like a whisper over the threshold. Her eyes lingered on the mirror when she passed. There was familiarity in her look, like someone recognizing a tune. I asked questions she did not answer. The notebook filled. I stopped writing dates and began listing impressions. The way my mouth in the glass wore a patient line long after I'd smiled, the quiet places where light seemed to gather like breath, the sense that rooms inside the mirror had their own last known arrangements. I told myself this was fatigue, that restoration had made my eye hungry for detail. But then I found an entry I did not write, a single line across the margin in a hand I did not recognize. "We are awake for you." The pen strokes were small, confident, impossible to belong to anyone else. I tried to prove independence. I left the apartment for hours, went to the river, drank coffee that tasted like other people's afternoons. When I returned, the mirror's reflection showed me walking in the doorway 5 minutes later than I actually did. It kept a record of wrongness like a ledger. The brass key beneath it felt colder when I lifted it. Curiosity and fear braided together. I turned the key in my hand as if it might wind answers out of the wood and glass. The key did nothing and everything at once. It weighed the air differently. I began to talk to the mirror as one talks to a sleeping animal. Slow sentences, soft offerings. "If it's you," I said once, "tell me something I do not know." The glass did not answer with words, only with patience. Its reflection loosened and rolled out a variation of my apartment as if unrolling a map. A chair where none had stood. A door open that was shut. The effect was not malevolent. It felt like a body of memory rehearsing different lives. I left a chair against the hallway wall for a week, as if seating patience itself could be a compromise. Sleep became a negotiation. I would catch myself holding my breath, listening for the tiny movements the mirror made when no one else stirred. Sometimes it would show me rising from bed at 3 in the morning and standing perfectly still in the hallway, a version of me that was calmer and intent, as if it needed to practice the posture of watching. I feared those rehearsals because they seemed less like mimicry and more like training. I could not tell who was learning and who was being taught. I tried to destroy it, an impulse quick and terrible that felt more like defense than malice. I lifted a hand to the glass and felt the cool give of history beneath skin, and the intention fell away. Instead, I wrote to the unknown hand in the margins. Why, days later, an answer appeared, not in words, but in a change of angle. The mirror showed me a room I had never known, shelves of faces in tiny frames, all looking politely off-center. The photograph beneath it shifted, revealing a woman's eyes that matched mine only in a way that made me uneasy. Mrs. Albright brought soup one evening and stayed longer than neighbors usually do. She sat across from the mirror and hummed a tune I didn't know. After a long minute, she said, "They learned that people would come here and pry." Her voice was small but certain. She told me in fragments about a building once divided by a hall of mirrors, how tenants used their reflections to remember small decisions, to test whether they were still themselves after the war and after the quiet losses. She said the mirrors kept records then, too. They listened without sleeping. One night, the mirror offered something that felt like mercy or entrapment. A view of me outside the apartment, walking past the building's dim facade at dusk, carrying a decision like a small coin. In the reflection, I hesitated, looked back at the glass, and saw a woman in the image of me who did not turn away. She lifted her hand and pressed it to the inside of the glass, an impossible tenderness. I pressed my palm against mine and felt only coolness, but something answered in the frame, a breath of warmer air, as if a presence leaned in to listen. I left a note beneath the mirror, the way one leaves a message on a kitchen counter. "If you are awake, do not follow me." The handwriting was clumsy with adrenaline. The next morning, the note had not moved, but the mirror's reflection showed the note slightly curled, as if at the edge of a breeze. I realized then that the mirror's waking was not about crossing thresholds, but cataloging potential exits. It kept a careful watch on decisions, like a librarian indexing pages by the margin of a life. The ending offered itself like a choice: remove the mirror and consign its memory to a junkyard, or sleep within the sound of its vigilance and learn the contours of wakefulness. I could have moved it back into the alley, perhaps setting free whatever meticulous attention the glass carried. Instead, I widened a chair to face it and sat there for an hour, then a night, and then nights folded into a habit. Mrs. Albright brought more soup and no judgment. Sometimes the mirror would show me worlds that were kinder, sometimes ones that were merely different. I learned to keep my eyes level. Now, sometimes when the bulb goes out and the building hum settles, I stand before the glass and wonder whose guardian I have become. The mirror does not demand that I watch. It simply keeps awake behind its silvered eyelid. There's a comfort in the constancy of its attention, and a thin terror in knowing there are lives it rehearses without me. The last line in my notebook reads, "If you must ask whether a mirror sleeps, perhaps you already understand the answer." I do not know whether that is a warning or a promise. Sometimes I imagine leaving the apartment door ajar, walking away until the city swallows me, and the mirror keeps its vigil alone. Sometimes I imagine the mirror, itself tired of centuries of attention, closing like an eye. Neither happens. The glass remains, and so does its wake. There is no triumphant severing, no final exorcism, only the quiet calculus of two watchers sharing a space. And if you ever pass a mirror that seems to look back a hair too long, be gentle. Perhaps it has chosen to keep someone awake.